Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. I've been running for a few years now and have the privilege of meeting many incredible runners on my travels all across the country. This podcast is intended to share those amazing conversations. And welcome back. I am here with Ladia Albertson-Junkans. Ladia, thanks so much for joining today.
Hey, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So first question, who is Ladia?
Oh, wow. We're
diving right in.
Yeah. Oh, geez. That's a great question. I hope we answer that a little bit over this conversation.
Awesome. So this podcast is all about exploring the why of what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. So I love sort of digging into what it takes for a high-level athlete to understand, what it is that keeps them going. So let's, before we dive into that, let's back up a little bit. Why did you go for your first run, or do you remember your first run?
I don't think I remember my very first run. I grew up just being outside all the time. Had a pretty big yard, was really fortunate to grow up kind of on the outskirts of town, almost in the country, so had a lot of space to run growing up and played a lot of tag with friends on the playground. I played soccer and basketball, so did a lot of running then. My uncle was really into marathons, and I remember going on a couple runs with him. Maybe I was 9 or 10, and being really inspired by him and thinking it was just the coolest thing that he ran marathons. And then my stepdad would take me running occasionally as well.
And so how did that progress to running marathons and beyond?
Yeah. Well, it really did start just for the pure joy of running and moving my body. And that kind of evolved into competitive team sports, so playing on soccer teams and basketball teams. And it was actually my eighth grade was my first introduction to track and field at the high school level. My middle school gym teacher at the time was a track and field coach with the high school, and we had done the mile for gym class, and he saw potential in me, and so recruited me to run with the high schoolers, which was pretty unusual at my school. It was a very large school, so middle schoolers often didn't run with high schoolers. But I was able to do that, and I had a lot of fun with it. And then when I didn't make the varsity soccer team my freshman year of high school, I went out for the cross country team and never looked back after that.
So what was it about cross country and running at that time that you were loving?
I think cross country just reminded me of the pure joy of running and the reasons I had been running since I could remember in the first place. So growing up out, almost in the country and just having green, grassy hills to run up and down and explore the woods in our backyard and go running with my stepdad, which usually involved some sort of trail. It was kind of the most enjoyable form of running for me.
Cool. So let's fast forward a few years. Now you've run a handful of marathons and ultras and 100-milers. We had a fun chat after you ran Boston. Was that 2019? I think. Yeah, last year.
Yep.
What was that experience like? I love how you described it.
Oh, wow. Boston was, I've always enjoyed running for the way that it brings people together, but Boston brings people together in a way I had never seen before with my own eyes. I was just blown away by the number of people who came out to spectate, just the velocity of the cheering. Everything about it was so full of energy and spirit and passion. And it was kind of like running a 100-meter dash for 26.2 miles. It was incredibly invigorating and also overstimulating, which I
Yeah.
realized pretty quickly or early on in the run that I was going to need to really manage that stimulation if I wanted to actually make it to the finish line.
Hmm.
But that's part of the fun of it, I think, is figuring out when to really engage and tune in with the fans and the runners around you, and then also figure out when you need to kind of turn inward and find some calmer moments. And you're constantly balancing that at Boston.
Cool. So when I told David, David Roche, my coach, that we were doing this podcast, his response was awesome. Ladia is one of the best humans of all time, and I think she should be president of the
Oh my
world.
gosh.
and I and I agree.
Oh boy.
So I wanted to have you on this podcast because you bring so much joy and happiness and hope to people through social media and through how you approach living life. And I think in a time like this, we could all learn a thing or two about like giving presents and being present and focusing on what we can do. And the reason I say that, and so for background, I've talked a lot with guests on this podcast about the experience I had last year with loss and with having a pretty shitty year on the personal side of things. And I continually reference a couple of friends that helped me through that. So for people who are listening, Ladia is one of those people that helped me through it. And so first I want to say thank you for that, because I vividly remember being in the bathroom of my grandparents' house and getting a text from you before I went to talk to my grandpa for the last time. And I don't know that I could have done that without the support that you gave me on that day and in the prior weeks and months. So first, thank you. That was all amazing. And second, I want to know, like, where is your head at in a time like this where hope is the only thing that we can have, and we have to be thinking of being appreciative and what we can do. We can still run. People in Europe can't do that. So where are you at mentally with where we're at today?
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing that up, Jonathan. And I just want to say thank you for letting me be a part of that time in your life for you. When you are losing someone who means so much to you, you don't have to let other people into that journey. And I think it says a lot about you that you were willing to let people in during that time. And I hope that what I helped you see was the strength already within you, and just affirm that you did that without my help. You could have done it without a text message from me. But I hope what that little message for you did was just remind you how strong and brave you already are. And I have to say that during this time especially, I just am constantly thinking of Gabe, and everything that I've learned about hope, I've learned largely through her and through my own experiences with loss and grief and depression and the highs and lows that all of us endure over a lifetime. And what strikes me so much about the way Gabe lived her life is that she actively continued to choose hope no matter how much fear she was feeling. And she felt a lot of it, plenty of it. The fear never went away, and it really never does, I don't think, for any of us, if we're being honest with ourselves. And she chose to hang on to hope along with that fear. And I think a lot of us can learn so much from the way she did that.
For sure. So I think that dichotomy is perfect. There have been a lot of articles that have come out recently that say, my friend Zoe wrote one in Trail Runner, and David writes a lot in Trail Runner along the same lines. Like, you have to acknowledge that it's okay to not feel great. And you can also, you can have multiple emotions at the same time. So you can have hope and you can have fear in parallel. It doesn't have to be one without the other, right?
Definitely. Yes.
So what I want to know is, like, how do we get there? How do we, for people that are in that state of fear, how do we bring hope into it? What were some of the things that you learned, over the last couple of years that can be practical and pragmatic ways to bring that hope to life?
Yeah. I think, and I speak only from my personal experience, of course, and for me, it starts with acknowledging the fear and naming it and facing it. And that's something Gabe really showed me how to do through her own example. There were times earlier in my life, I think, when I wasn't willing to acknowledge fear or face it. And instead, I avoided it and tried to pretend it wasn't there. And that oftentimes triggers a much different cascade of responses than facing it and acknowledging it and accepting that you're going to be carrying it with you and you don't have control over whether it exists or not, but you do have control over your response to it. And for Gabe, that response was hope.
I love that. So I was having a conversation with a coworker last night, and she had said that she just went to a therapist, and her experience was much needed. And she said that I asked her how she was feeling and how she was doing, and she said that she always says that pain demands to be felt because it's going to find its way out, so you might as well feel it. So I think that jives with, giving a name to it and acknowledging that it's there and letting that be okay.
Definitely. I love that. And you can replace the word pain with so many different things. It's the same with grief. Grief demands to be felt. Loss demands to be felt. And joy demands to be felt. So, yeah, I think that's a really great way of putting it.
Cool. What's bringing you joy today?
My dog, Farmer, he brings me joy every moment of every day. And one amazing part of all this stay-at-home stuff is that I get to spend all my moments with the wonderful and adorable Farmer, the dog. Being able to spend so much time with my husband brings me so much joy. Being able to connect with friends in new ways is bringing me so much joy. Being able to get outside and move my body is bringing me so much joy, and I feel so much gratitude that I can still do it at this point, and I feel so much gratitude that other people are still able to do it to some extent, and obviously that's not the case everywhere, right. But I'm grateful for the people who are able to continue moving their bodies outside. I feel so much gratitude that I'm able to help in small ways, or what I hope is helpful in small ways, like supporting small businesses, buying gift cards, still doing takeout where it's allowed, picking up groceries, delivering groceries for people in the community as needed, donating to, there's a really huge response fund in Seattle that is supporting local organizations and really a flexible and productive way to meet the needs of people as they change. So I'm just grateful for the small ways that I can hopefully help, and also acknowledging that there's a lot of ways I can't be of immediate help, and hopefully I can offer my prayers and good vibes and just keep people in my thought and in my heart. And I think a lot about people for whom home isn't a safe place to be, and people for whom shelter and food aren't guaranteed, and who don't know how they're going to get their next meal. And I am still grappling with how I could help people with that kind of need in some small way. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are in a strange place where we want to do as much as possible to help, and I find myself like spending more than I normally would,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
trying to like do my part. And I think we have to realize that, just like training is a it's a long it like every little day is a brick in the wall, and every person who's contributing to their local economy or to the food bank or to whatever it might be, that's the that's us contributing. So I think it's hard because we want Justin just texted me. What funny timing. We want to do everything, and we want to help in as many ways as possible. And I think that's good, but I think we also have to realize mobilizing other people is just as helpful, if not more, so we can have a snowball effect. Because sure, we could spend $200 a week supporting local businesses and takeout and groceries and stuff, or we can do something similar and help other people understand the importance of doing takeout if you can afford it, or buying gift cards if you can afford it, or donating your time, or delivering food to people, or things like that. And I think it's a power in numbers type situation where
definitely.
the more we can do, and the more people we can inspire to do something, that's how we have an impact, for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's one thing I've been really heartened by, is just seeing the broad community response to this. It really does feel like most people, if not everybody, wants to do their part and help out in some small way. And honestly, that includes reaching out to the people you care about. And it really just overwhelmingly seems like people are really trying to do that. And it's a beautiful thing.
Do you feel more connected than ever before, despite being isolated?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I do too.
That's
It's
awesome.
funny. It's like, I did a happy hour with my college friends last weekend, and at the end of it, there were 10 of us on the call. And at the end of it, we acknowledged that it had been 8 years since we'd all been in the same room together. All 10 of us. We had people from New York, from Boston, and from Korea. And literally the last time we were all together was the spring or the summer we graduated. And we we had these capabilities, for the last 8 years to do a Zoom call, but it takes something to make a change. And I hope that that's a change that has lasting power, or staying power.
I hope so too. That's so beautiful. I love that so much. And I think from what I can tell, it seems like a lot of people are having that experience, and it's
Mm-hmm.
really special.
What are some of the things that you've been doing to try and stay connected?
I feel like I'm constantly texting people, it almost to a point where I need to force myself to take breaks and kind of put my phone aside, because
Yeah,
it can also get to be too much.
right.
But yeah, and I've been doing Zoom. Um, I don't want to call them meetings because they're with friends. So Zoom gatherings. But I've also, and some Zoom happy hours with coworkers. It's been great. Yeah. And then of course, just being able to spend so much quality time with my husband, Adam, that in itself is invaluable. And I recognize that I may never get this much time alone with him ever again. So we're just really trying to appreciate it and savor it and make the most of it.
That's awesome. I saw a tweet that said, now I get why dogs are so excited to go outside when we get home from work.
Oh, that's so great. Yes, totally.
It's like, yeah, I'm like going out once every 2 days. And every time I go outside for 20 minutes, it's like, yeah, now I get it.
Yeah, you're bouncing off the trees.
Exactly.
Your tail is wagging for sure. Yeah, I love that.
So something I've wondered, is gratitude something that you practice intentionally, or is that part of who you are and it just sort of happens?
It feels really organic for me at this point. And I'll say that I think that came from being really intentional about it during a period of my life when I was really struggling and in a really dark place. And being intentional about gratitude is a big part of what helped me through and out of that darkness. But that was about, probably over 10 years ago now at this point. And since then, it's just been a part of how I live my life.
Cool. And how does running play into, or does running play into that?
Definitely. I would say running for me feels very much like an expression of that gratitude. It's the way that I express appreciation for the fact that I can run, for the fact that I can get outside, for the fact that I can challenge myself in these amazing ways and connect with people in these amazing ways. And even when I'm training for a specific race or a specific distance, the thing that gets me out the door every day and the thing that I focus on the most, no matter what kind of the point of it is that gratitude and the fact that this is something that is by no means guaranteed. It could be, quote unquote, taken away from me, tomorrow. At any
Quite
point,
literally.
anything can change. Yeah. Well, especially now, but I mean, even
Right.
before all of this, anything can change. And again, that's something that I really learned through my own losses in my life. And then also through Gabe's experience, where her cancer, she would find out that her cancer was back and all of a sudden everything would change and she would have to, whether that was had to get a procedure the very next week and that's the end of her track season or we need to do this big surgery in 3 months and it's going to be a 4-month recovery. So, training's on hold, racing's on hold, that sort of thing. I mean, just there's a lot of reminders in life that we need to appreciate what we have while we have it.
For sure. So Gabe's foundation is called Brave Like Gabe. What is bravery to you?
Bravery is Gabe Grunewald and everyone who follows, the example that she set and who finds bravery within themselves. And sometimes that's what you have to do in order to get through really, really tough times in your life. And I think it's also what you have to do to stay grateful and appreciative of what you have when everything's going really, really well. So it's really seen through a compassionate lens.
I love that. How did your running evolve to being able to run 100 miles in a race?
If you have the answer to that, I would love to hear it because you probably know as much as I know. It still blows my mind that I traveled 100 miles on my feet at one time.
What was that like?
Yeah, well, so my experience was probably really unique in some ways and really universal in others, as is probably that could probably be said of anything, right? But what I mean by that is So I ran Western States last year in 2019, and that was less than a month after Gabe died. And I was able to spend Gabe's final 10 days in Minnesota. Much of that time was with her. And I'm eternally grateful for that. It's still to this day like the best gift that I've ever received and probably ever will, to be able to spend that time with her. And then after she died, as you know, and as a lot of people, as everybody knows, a lot of things happen with planning and arranging for the funeral and memorials. And then also with the foundation, there was just a lot going on. And Western States was really the first time after Gabe died that I had time to myself. And so I really approached it as this huge gift of being able to spend 100 miles with my best friend, Gabe, and also to start to try to process everything that had just happened. And that wasn't even that happened in the last month, but also over the past 10 years since Gabe was first diagnosed, and then even starting before that.
So it was moving meditation, essentially.
It really was. Yeah. Yeah. And just it was my way of feeling close to Gabe. And I mean, I really mean it when I say like processing, just especially the decline in her health that she experienced over the preceding, I would say, 3 to 4 months before she died. She had started a new experimental drug. It was kind of the last option on the table for her, and it had really harsh side effects. And so she was in a lot of pain and discomfort for those couple of months, and, constantly nauseous, vomiting a lot, kind of achy joints, some skin things. It was really brutal, and she was absolutely exhausted. The fatigue was just all consuming, and that in itself really made it hard mentally, emotionally, and spiritually for her. And so, I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I mean, I know this sounds woo-woo, but like talking to her about it during the Western States.
No, I know what you mean by that. So I ran rim to rim to rim in October, and I had a section of running where I felt like it was an out-of-body experience, and I was present. I was running with my friend Tony, and this was like mile 30, and I had never run more than 31 miles in my life. I had never been on my feet for more than 7 hours, and this was like 10 hours in, maybe 11 hours in. So it was like way beyond anything I'd ever experienced. And I was running effortless 7-minute miles, 7:30 miles.
Wow.
And I mean, we were going like softly downhill in the middle of the canyon coming back, but I was like, I couldn't feel anything physically. And I was having conversation with my friend Tony, and Tony and I spent a lot of time traveling together, and we spent a lot of time in cars or running together. And so, you can only make small talk work for so long, when you're in a car with someone for 5 hours, or when you're running with someone for 7 hours. And so we were talking about all this kind of stuff, and gratitude and loss and community and this and that. And all of a sudden I like got the chills, and I just had this like feeling that my grandpa was there, and I was just like, I can't explain what it felt like, but I know exactly what you're saying. Yep. And I was talking to him, and I knew he was proud of me, and I knew he was watching me have, the best day of my life from an adventure standpoint. And It's like, that's what we live for, like to be able to have those like out of body, maybe it's flow, maybe it's, whatever, but you can't plan for that. You can't say, oh, I'm going to go out on the river today and achieve flow.
Right.
Uh, it just happens. And I had a conversation with Magda on the podcast, um, and I think it was like episode 10, or it was a way early. And she was like, you might only get that like once or twice or a handful of times in your running career. And when you have it, like that's what we live for.
Definitely. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I also would say too, like, we won't have those experiences with our loved ones all the time either, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it just underscores it sounds like you knew it when it was happening, what a gift it was. Like,
Yeah.
this right here, I am with my grandpa right now, and I
Yeah.
don't care what anyone else would think about that or say about this. Like, I know with
Mm-hmm.
every piece of me that I am with my grandpa right now, and it's such a gift. I mean, that's really the only way of describing it. And I've had that like several times with Gabe, and it just makes me so happy. I'm smiling ear to ear right now after you share that
I
story.
can feel it.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. And it's funny because my Western States experience did have moments of that, and it also had many, many more moments of pretty just like very intense physical and emotional discomfort, which is not
Yeah.
surprising. I mean, anytime you travel 100 miles, it's going to be really
Right.
uncomfortable for a really long time. And but there were several points. It was like such a journey with her that I would never replace. I would like never give that back in a million years, and I wouldn't have wanted it any other way than the way that it was.
What was it like, um, climbing out from the trail onto the road and then running onto the track and taking that 3/4 lap around the track?
I mean, that was the
So
home.
for those
Yeah, go ahead.
those of you that don't know, the way that Western States works is it's like 99 miles on trail, or whatever it is, and then you're in this neighborhood, and then you run a half or 3/4 of a lap around the placer. It's called Placer High,
Yep.
Placer High track, into the finish line. So what was that journey like?
That was honestly the homecoming. And I feel like in order to try to adequately describe it, I have to back up a little bit and say that things really started to unravel for me around mile 45. My quads were completely shot from all the downhill, as everybody knows and warns you about. And that's exactly what happened to me. Also, my stomach had already, gone to crap, and I was puking up everything I tried to eat. So that was starting at mile 45, and that lasted over 10 hours. And I had many moments of like very long breaks where I would, sit down on the side of the trail. In addition to like just, I was moving really slowly. And all of that whole time the only thing I was thinking about was the way that Gabe had suffered.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a moment in the middle of the night when, my world was narrowing to this increasingly small beam of light produced by your headlamp. And I just all of a sudden had this fear of, oh my gosh, like, what if this is what it was like for Gabe when she was dying? Like, the light was just getting narrower and narrower and further away. And I started worrying that, like, gosh, maybe I had totally projected my own needs onto her and just decided for myself that she was at peace, because that was really how I had felt those last 10 days with her, like overwhelming grace and peace, even though it was also so incredibly difficult. But it was really the grace that like rings like strongest in my mind from that time. And I had talked about it in the eulogy that I gave at her service. But in that moment out on the Western States Trail, I was kind of freaking out that I had totally gotten it all wrong. And like, no, this must have been terrifying for her. And then almost equally as quickly, I started realizing that, yeah, okay, so this beam of light is getting smaller and smaller, but that is completely ignoring this vast expanse around me. So like the darkness around me. And, as humans, we're really trained to fear the dark, and we call that the unknown. But I think as like spiritual beings, the darkness is the great expanse, and I think of it as benevolent. And as I started focusing less on the light and more on that expanse, I realized that I was completely surrounded by it, completely engulfed in it. And like, that's exactly what a hug is. That's exactly what an embrace and love is. And it was almost like, again, I know this sounds woo-woo, but I swear I heard her reassuring me that like, it's okay, she's okay. And it was okay. And it was this really interesting moment of like peace and clarity for me, that like, I don't know, what happens when we die. And I don't know what happened when Gabe died. I can try my best to observe what I observed during that time for her, but ultimately none of us can ever know. But I have to say, just like what I felt in that expansiveness and that potential just felt so comforting and beautiful. And then like before I knew it, the sun was rising. And because yes, I was out there that long, the sun was rising, and it was this beautiful cotton candy sunrise. And Gabe loved sunsets, and every like cotton candy sky that me and my friends see, we always think of Gabe. And it just felt like this sign from her, and from whatever your higher power or higher love is, like that everything is okay. And so I had that whole experience, and then I got to the track, and the track was honestly like that homecoming moment of like, Gabe is okay. Like, we did this, and I can like rest knowing that she's okay.
That's amazing. What time did you finish? What time in the morning?
I think it was like, oh man. So I ran 26 hours and 41 minutes, and I'm really bad at math, even though I'm a programmer, but I rely on computers. It must have been. I don't know. I mean, the sun had been up for a while.
Yeah. So it was crowded, is what I'm guessing.
It was. I mean, it wasn't the golden hour yet, right. So it wasn't as crowded as it would get. But yeah, there were a decent number of people out there for sure.
So I went. I was at the finish line in 2018, and it was incredible to be there in the morning. And then we went and got breakfast, and then came back for a golden hour. And just like the triumph that these people were experiencing, to finish at 10:59:50. It was wild.
Oh, I loved that part. I mean, I passed out for a solid probably hour, like the kind of passing out where I didn't even realize I had fallen asleep. I just like woke up an hour later, but I was awake for golden hour because I didn't want to miss it. And that was certainly just one of the highlights of probably all of my running experiences.
That's awesome. Do you think you'll run the race again?
I would love to, but I also recognize it is so difficult to get in. I may never have another chance. And, another thing that I have been aware of is like, I'm sure, some people would hear about my experience at States and feel a little bit like, why wouldn't you try to race it as hard as you could or as well as you could? You might never get another chance. And I think that's totally true. And I was fully aware of that because I might not ever get another chance. And I would love to try to race it, like really race it and have, the different pieces dialed more than I did. But I also, like I said, wouldn't trade it for anything. And it was exactly the way that it needed to be for me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've run Boston definitely a different scale, but I've run Boston a couple times and I've raced other marathons. I've never properly raced Boston. And to run versus to race, it's a totally different intent, right? You can have just as much fun, if not more fun, from, I don't want to say fun running, but going out and being fully present with the crowd and with yourself and with what's going on around you versus, head down and racing. There's definitely time for both. But I think that, there's plenty of time for I hesitate to call it fun running, but fun running.
Right. Yeah. And I think it just underscores that there are as many reasons for racing and for running as there are people doing it.
Right. And whatever your reason is, that's fine.
Exactly. Yep.
What do the next few years look like? What are some big goals you have? What are some big goals you have?
It's funny. I totally just made a face because I am notoriously bad at thinking about the future. I am very much a go with the flow, roll with it, see what happens kind of person. That said, it's a huge privilege to be able to think about the future. And I don't want to overlook that. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. I would say the biggest thing I'm looking forward to right now is hopefully sooner rather than later, Adam and I would like to add to our family. So that's kind of first and foremost in terms of what I'm really focusing on right now. And then continuing to run, whatever form that might take through the journey of adding to a family.
Cool. What do you wish you knew when you started running that you know today?
You ask really great questions.
Thank you.
I'm tempted to say I wish I would have known more about myself, but I also recognize that running is such a big part of what's helped me learn more about myself. So it's by design that I didn't know more about myself when I first started.
Sort of like a learning on the go.
Yeah, and just it really is the journey and that evolution. It's tempting to want to jump ahead and skip the hard parts, but the hard parts are what makes life so beautiful and textured and rich, and also what make the sweet moments that much sweeter. So I think just, appreciating that I am where I am, I was where I was, and I don't need to change either of those things.
That's awesome. And I totally agree. I think that the highs and lows are nothing without each other.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. And both from a literal standpoint, like you can't get to the top of a mountain without starting from the bottom. But just like that, you can't experience these euphoric, amazing feelings without the dichotomy of like, wow, this sucks right now. And it's not always like that.
Yep. Definitely.
What's your relationship like with Justin?
Oh, we're great buddies. Yeah, definitely. He's one of my best friends.
His, and I think I've shared this on the podcast as well before, but his, both yours and his, experience last year sort of paved the road for me with loss and grief. And I saw him just like being raw and open and vulnerable with how he was dealing with everything. And I think that as a society, we don't talk about these things, and we don't talk about loss and grief, and nobody knows how to deal with it. And so I had no, this was my first experience with it, and I had no context for like, what do you do? And so I just sort of emulated what he did, just being super open with it and, sharing it all on Instagram. And I found it like really therapeutic and really helpful. And I mean, I guess that's my style, but the messages I got from people along the way were fascinating, and basically echoed the sentiment of like, nobody talks about this. What are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
And so I think that talking in general is always good.
Definitely. I am nodding along with you. Yep.
Yeah. And so I think that was awesome. What's a question I like to ask on the podcast as well is what are you scared of?
I used to be mortified of losing my loved ones. And that's because from personal experience, having lost my dad and my stepdad, after my stepdad died, I went into a very deep, dark depression, as I think a lot of people do in that valley of grief. And some of the moments that I had in that valley really scared me, because I stopped feeling like my life was worth it and that my life was valuable. And that was a very scary feeling. And so after that, I for sure attributed those feelings to the grief I had felt. And so I was scared of having to feel that grief again, which the longer we live, the more people we lose and the more grief we feel. And honestly, I know this sounds weird, and I don't say it in any way to like make light of it. But that grief is such an honor, and we're the lucky ones who get to carry it, for the person whose life was lost.
So I had a long chat with my boss about this, and he's in his 40s, and when he was in his 20s, he lost his grandfather, and he said to me, he was like, thinking about your experience has brought me to tears like many, many times. And he was like, but I like the pain. I wouldn't have it any other way, because what a gift it is to love someone so much that it's physically painful that they're not there. And I grew up with 4 of my grandparents and a great grandmother, and that's a gift. And having parents and siblings and cousins and this and that, and there's so many people out there that don't have that gift, or they don't have those relationships. So yeah, I I 1,000,000% agree with you that the pain is like a badge, or not a badge, but it's a gift. Yeah, it's a gift.
It is
That's
a
the only way to
gift.
describe it.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's try and wrap on a let's bring it back to hope and bravery. What are the mantras that you focus on when things get tough?
A big one for me is staying in the moment. And a good example of that was Western States, when early on, probably less than 25 miles in, and you're starting to feel tired. And I was thinking to myself, oh my
75 miles to go.
Yeah, exactly. And if I let myself focus too much on how many miles I have left to go, it was way too overwhelming, and it would have been way too easy to give up. So just recentering myself and staying and really encouraging myself to stay in the moment was critical. And I think that applies to every area of life, and especially during times of uncertainty. Because if we start to think too far ahead, and again, I mean, when there's so much uncertainty, it's looming and it feels really overwhelming. And so just bringing it back to the moment and staying centered in the moment, hopefully can help mitigate that anxiety about the great unknown a little bit, while at the same time acknowledging that the uncertainty inevitably is going to bring some anxiety. But actually, there's a quote I really like, and I had shared it, I think, yesterday, by this guy, and I'm going to botch it, but basically he says, when it comes to uncertainty, we don't know enough, and we can't know enough to justify despair and passivity. And I think that's such a cool way of framing uncertainty. You know, like, so in so much of our narrative, uncertainty is a bad thing, is, you know, this big scary monster with no face that's hunting us down. But we have no evidence for that, and we could equally say that it's this benevolent expanse where we get to play a role in creating what it becomes. And he's right. Like, we don't know enough to justify complete and utter despair. We don't know enough to completely give up. And so it's just kind of spinning that uncertainty and focusing on the possibilities and the hope inherent to that uncertainty, as opposed to the fear.
Amazing. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up here.
Cool.
If people want to follow along, I don't know why they wouldn't. Where can we find you on social?
Sure. I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is Ladia Hallie. And shoot me a message if you ever want to chat. I love, chatting, as Jonathan knows. So thanks so much for listening. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of your beautiful podcast. I just love the conversations you're having and the way that you've followed your curiosity.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a part of it, and we'll see you out there.
Yeah, sounds good. Bye.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next week on For the Long Run. And in the meantime, happy trails. If you've enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too.